In this podcast, you'll learn some differences between British English and American English, which we hope will remove any confusion you may have when you hear the same thing said different. Or is it said differently? Are they both correct? Welcome to
Aprender Inglés with Reza and Craig.
Hello, and if you're a new listener to the podcast, you're very, very welcome. And if you've come back to listen again, thank you. My name's Craig.
And my name's Reza.
And we've been teaching for over 50 years, which means we've got a lot of experience to help you improve your English and take it to the next level. How are you, Reza?
I'm okay. I've got a lot of experience. I've also got a lot of grey hair, I've noticed recently. Looking in the mirror, it's grown a lot in the last couple of months. But apart from that, I'm fine. And you?
You're looking very well, and you've recently had a haircut which suits you. So I'm very pleased that you're having a break from teaching and you're looking so healthy and relaxed. Yeah, I'm good, mate. I'm fine and really happy to be podcasting again this week. We have a voice message to start this week's episode all the way from Brazil. This is Jessica.
Hey guys, this is Jessica from Brazil. Long time no see. Let's see if you can remember me. I tried to be authentic here and just go with the first recording. And let's see what happens. All the mistakes that I'll probably make. Anyway, last time I told you about my trip to Ireland. And I've been there last year. I stayed 15 days in Galway in a host family. And my host mom, she's Irish, so I learned a lot from her and also from the school. I had such amazing friends from all over the world, and I visited all the beautiful places around there, and it was such an awesome experience that I'm actually planning the next one. This time to the U.S., San Diego, and I chose to stay in a residence for students because this time my goal is not to improve my English. I just want to have fun. I think I am at ease with my level of English right now. I just see it as a hobby, and I like to listen to the podcasts that I like and movies as well and series and to read stuff. So this time I just want to make new friends and have fun because I don't know, when you are in a school, in an exchange program, everyone there wants to make new friends and have fun. So let's see. I'll tell about it. Quick note about pet peeves. I have one that really drives me nuts. It's when I'm driving and there is someone in front of me that is lower than the average speed and I can't outrun them. So it's really stressful. And also about mania, I play with my hair. Like every day, all the time, especially when I'm bored. And my mom once told me that I've been doing this since I was a child. A baby, actually. So it's impossible for me to stop it. It's in my inner cravings. So that's it. It's already a long audio. See you soon. Bye. Have a good one.
Thank you, Jessica, for your message. Yes, long time no see, or long time no hear, perhaps we should say. And of course, we remember you. Thank you for sending us your message. And it sounds like you've been having a wonderful time. You had a wonderful time in Galway, in Ireland, and you're off soon to California. It sounds wonderful.
Yes, Jessica, I'm jealous of you. It sounds like you get around. That means you travel a lot. Strangely, I might be visiting Galway myself in a couple of months. I'm from Ireland, although I'm from Belfast, but I was thinking in August, it's currently July when I'm recording this podcast, I was thinking in August of doing a tour around Ireland, and I might well go to Galway myself. And one of these days, I'd love to go to California. So I'm hot on your heels. I'm following you, Jessica. I'm catching up on you slowly.
I'd love to go to Brazil. So if I do one day, I will reach out, and it'd be nice to see your local area, Jessica, if you're there, if you're not traveling around the world. One small thing I'd like to focus on, and I'm really pleased you decided to go with it, or go with the flow, we could say, and just speak. And you did exceptionally well. Lovely pronunciation. You're very comfortable with English, and that really came across. But you did say, I've been there last year, which is confusing past simple and present perfect. You can say, I've been to Ireland, if you're talking about places you have been to in your life. Or if you're speaking about a point in the past, last year, use past simple. I went there last year. So I've been to Ireland, or I went to Ireland last year.
Another thing that I noticed, Jessica, just a small thing, you said, I'll tell about it. And of course, we understand you. But you need to say, I'll tell you about it. Because you tell a person about something. So you have to put in the word you. I'll tell you about it. Or you could say, I'll talk about it. You don't need to put in a person if you use the word talk. So you can say, I'll talk about it, or I'll tell you about it.
Another very small thing that we understood, but we can improve slightly. You said, I'm at easy with my English level. Better to say, I'm at ease with. If you feel very comfortable with something, like your English, you can say, I'm at ease with it.
And one last little thing, Jessica. When you were talking about how you get stressed when you're driving, when there's a car in front of you and you can't get past them, you said that you feel very frustrated when you can't outrun the car in front of you. I wouldn't use the word outrun there. That word's more for like a competition or a game or something like that, but driving on the motorway is not a game. It's not a competition, unless you're a Formula One driver, of which Brazil has produced many good ones, I know, but presumably you are not. So a more typical word would be to overtake the car. So you get very frustrated if you're behind the car and you cannot overtake the car in front of you.
And Jessica said that it drives her nuts. I don't know if there was a play on word there between driving and drives me crazy, drives me nuts. It really annoys me. But Jessica was speaking about the episode we did on pet peeves, things that really annoy you. You can go listen to that and send us your pet peeves, as Jessica did. It's inglespodcast.com/461. And she also spoke about the mania of touching her hair or playing with her hair. That was the episode on manias. Go to inglespodcast.com/466. And Jessica's very lucky. She's been to Ireland. She's going to California to practice her English and make friends. But how can you improve your English if you cannot travel abroad? Well, you could join me and a small group of lovely students and study English online in my conversation course. Get in touch, send me an email, and I will give you more details. My email address is Craig, Craig, @inglespodcast.com, and we'll be studying through the summer here until probably October, November. So if you're interested and you want to improve your speaking, send me an email.
Now, in the past, we've already spoken about differences between British and American English, but we focused on vocabulary differences. and also pronunciation differences. In fact, why not check out some older episodes? For example, episode 81. So if you go to inglespodcast.com/ and then you put the number 81, you'll find an episode there. Also, episode 288. So after inglespodcast.com/288, there's 2 episodes where we spoke about the differences. But what we haven't really spoken about much is the grammar differences, not vocabulary or pronunciation, but specifically grammar differences between British and American English. So that's what we're going to talk about now.
That's right. We're beginning with collective nouns. So a collective noun is what it says on the tin. A collective noun is a noun that represents a group of something or a collection of something. For example, family, the collection of people, right? Or team is another collective noun. So in American English, you might hear, and I'll try a really bad American accent, Reza's soccer team is losing. Sorry about that.
Sorry, I got lost. Are we in America or Australia? I'm not sure. Can you do it again?
I'm not as good as you.
No, I'm not good either.
No, you are, but I'll try again. Reza's soccer team is losing. That's terrible, isn't it? Is losing. Americans would tend to use is for collective nouns.
Yes, whereas in British English, collective nouns, like team, they can either be singular or plural. Both are used, although the plural form is most often used. So Craig said, sorry, I have to do the American accent. Reza's soccer team is losing.
Much better than mine.
Well, I don't know where I'm from in America, though. Hawaii, I'm not sure. Can't put a place to it. Whereas in British English, let me try an English accent rather than an Irish accent. Let's see. Craig's football team are losing. Or Craig's football team is losing. So in British English, it can be are or is, but most British people use are. So the opposite of American English.
And personally speaking, I would use are if I tend to think of the individual players. If I've got an emotional familiarity or connection to the team. For example, I support Arsenal, the Arsenal football team from London, and I know most of the players. So when I think of the team, I do think of the team as individual players, and I would tend to use are losing or are wonderful or the team are because I'm thinking of those individual players, although is also possible in British English.
Here's a few more examples of collective nouns. So you could do it the more typically American way, using a singular, or the more typically British way, using a plural. So, for example, the government plan to change the education system, or the government plans. Oh, sorry, I forgot the accent. Yeah, British accent. The government plan to change the education system. I think I'm from the southeast of London, somewhere, I'm not exactly sure. And now American. The government plans to change the education system.
Yeah, very good.
The S at the end of the verb, remember, is not plural. No, that's singular. Third person singular S. The government plans. That's the verb getting an S because it's third person singular.
And family, I mentioned the collective noun family before, could be singular, could be plural in British English. My family is friendly once you get to know them, or my family are friendly once you get to know them. Both will be acceptable in British English. Remember to see these examples, go to the show notes, inglespodcast.com/477.
Another very common word is staff, a collective singular. So the staff was very well trained, or the staff were very well trained.
The word police is always plural. So it is a collective noun, police, but whether you're speaking British English or American English, the accepted grammar rule for police is plural. For example, the police are determined to tackle crime in this area. Although having said that, I do remember very clearly an episode of The Wire, which is now a fairly old US American police drama TV series, and I heard this sentence. The Baltimore police is good people. Now that's very colloquial, that's very Baltimore language, but it disturbed me on two levels. First of all, the singular is with police, and secondly, is good people? No, are good people. So yeah, that really stood out. I really noticed that when I heard it in the TV series.
Yeah, I wouldn't dare say such a thing in an English exam. I'm sure they'd penalize you for that. They wouldn't let you off with that.
But in the streets of Baltimore, you'd be considered okay.
Another word which attracts different usage depending on whether you're British or American is the word get. So North Americans, when I say North Americans, that could be people from the United States or could be people from Canada as well. So North Americans use the word gotten, Gotten, as the past participle of the verb to get. So it's get, got, and then past participle gotten. Whereas British people don't have this word gotten. They use got as the past simple and the past participle. So in British English, it's to get, got, got.
So read an example in your lovely American accent from Baltimore.
I'm not sure if it's Baltimore, Hawaii. Where's that?
Hawaii?
Hawaii. You see, I told you I didn't know where it's from. Alaska. This could be Alaska. Let's see. Craig's gotten pretty good at video games.
Craig's gotten pretty good at video games. Gotten good. And British English, we'd use got. Reza's got really good at video games.
You'll also hear the word got quite often this way in American English. I gotta go. Or it could also be I have to go. But in American English, you're far more likely to hear I gotta go. So sometimes when people write it and they're trying to show that it's the spoken way, they're being very informal, they write Gotta. But that isn't a real word. Really, that's the short form of got to. I gotta go.
So that's for obligation, isn't it? You feel the obligation to go. I have to go. Whereas in the UK, you will often hear I've got to go. So the contraction of I have, I've, and then got to. I've got to. I've got to go, I've got to buy, I've got to be, I've got to have.
And I've got is mostly used by British people, whereas Americans don't often add got to the word have. They just say I have. So it means the same thing. I mean, if I said to you, I have got a car, it means exactly the same as I have a car. There's no difference.
But that's for possession, not for obligation.
Right. This is possession we're talking about. So I have a car equals I have got a car or I've got a car. But Americans tend not to add got. So can you give me an example, Craig, of something British people might say with got?
Yes, I'll give you two ways to say it. Reza's got a really nice accent. Although when I speak, I would probably make the got, the t on got, very weak and very soft and say got. It almost disappears, got. It stops in the throat. I would say Reza's got a really nice accent.
Not true, by the way, but I thank you for the sentence anyway. And in American English, they would tend to say, Craig has an awesome accent. So not Craig's got. I could say that if I want, but in American English, they tend not to add the word got when they're talking about possessive. They just say, Craig has an awesome accent.
Thank you for the compliment. I don't agree, but thank you anyway. Let's move on from possession, expressing possession, to using the word need or needn't. Now, needn't, which is the negative and a contraction of not, need not, needn't, that's quite common in British English. But what do people say in American English, Reza?
Americans are more likely to say don't need to. So when a British person says, you needn't send me the recording, an American's more likely to say, you don't need to send me the recording.
And I want to stress and emphasize that all of these different ways of using English are correct. It just depends on whether you happen to be using American English or British English. So really, it doesn't matter. I would say it's better to stay with one or the other and not mix them too much, especially if you're taking an exam. Stick to and stay with either American English usage or British English usage. But you'll be understood in both places, and it really doesn't matter which one you use.
Yeah, think about it. It doesn't make common sense to mix vocabulary or grammar. Imagine you're speaking Spanish and you start by saying, ¿Cómo está usted? Usted form. Fair enough. Fine. ¿Cómo está usted? But then in your next sentence you say, Porque quiero que vos está cómodo. Vos? Suddenly? What's this? I thought it was usted a second ago. So are you Spanish or are you Argentinian? You better make up your mind, because, correct me if I'm wrong, our listeners are down there in Argentina, but you say vos when Spanish people say usted. So you're not going to say usted in one sentence and the next sentence you're going to say vos. It's not going to happen. People think you're weird. So you don't mix the grammar in Spanish. If it's Argentinian Spanish, go for that. If it's Spanish, go for that. But you can't mix the different grammar. It's the same for British and American. You don't mix one or the other.
Moving on to the word shall, S-H-A-L-L, that's fairly common with British English speakers. People often use shall to offer something to you or to maybe make a suggestion. For example, Reza, shall I make tea? Or shall I open the biscuits? But Americans wouldn't use it that way, would they?
Very rarely, though they would understand you, but they would probably make fun of you if you said that to them. Can you imagine saying to an American, "Oh, shall we have a cup of tea?" And they'd say, "Oh, yes, shall we?" How very 19th century they would find it. But it's 21st century in the United Kingdom. People are still using it, but Americans find it very, very antiquated, let's say.
So what would an American say?
Well, because it's so unusual for them to use shall, they'd have to get round it by using some other kind of grammatical structure. They could say something like, should we do something? Or can I? Or do you want a cup of tea, for example? Would you like a cup of tea? How about a cup of tea? Or instead of shall, just will. Will we have a cup of tea? And I've got to tell you, Craig, that it's the same in Ireland. You'll rarely hear shall. So I'm very familiar with it because I hear a lot of British people using it. But in Ireland, north and south, like the Americans, we tend to avoid it as well. We consider it excessively posh. It sounds very posh to us. It's a little bit kind of quaint when we hear it.
It sounds posh to me, and I don't think I would use it very often, but I do hear it quite a lot, which is why we've included it in our notes here. And here's an example for you with UK English, British English. The internet connection keeps dropping out. I keep losing you on our call. Shall I call you back? Shall I? Shall I call you back? Which means, do you want me to call you back? What would an American say?
An American might say, but with a better accent than me, the internet connection keeps dropping out. How about I call you back?
Yeah.
So instead of shall I, how about?
Here's another example. Reza, shall we record the podcast at 6 p.m.?
An American might say, do you want to record the podcast at 6 p.m.? So instead of shall we, do you want to?
Reza, shall we move on to the next point?
Yes, let's. That's very British as well. To say let's is so British. Yes, let's is how you respond to shall.
Yes, we shall. Okay, so your friend and mine, we all love it. The present perfect. What differences are there in British English? Well, the present perfect tense is used a lot more in British English than American English. That's what I think. Do you agree, Reza?
Yes, for sure. Yeah.
So we use the present perfect to describe a past event that has a present result or a present consequence. But for these uses in American English, they often use the past simple to talk about this. Let me give you some examples. Reza feels sick now, at the moment. He's eaten too much pizza. So that would be in British English, he has eaten. He's eaten too much pizza. Present result, he's sick. What would an American say?
An American might express exactly the same thing, but with a past simple, even though they are referring to a present consequence. They might well say this: Craig feels sick. He ate too much chocolate. So instead of he's eaten, he ate. But some Americans do use the present perfect there. Some do. But I would say the majority just seem to prefer the past simple. It's weird because as English teachers, Craig and I are very used to teaching the present perfect. And a lot of what we teach is simply just not followed by Americans. And it's the sort of thing which occupies quite a lot of space in grammar books and textbooks. And then strangely, it turns out in American English, they don't bother to follow the rules at all.
And sometimes I have to stop myself when I'm teaching online and I hear somebody say something like that. He ate too much chocolate, that's why he's sick. I have to think very carefully, do I need to correct this or not? And that depends on if the student is preparing for an exam, for example, where they're using British English, they need to know the difference. But if it's just a conversation class and the idea is to communicate effectively, I probably wouldn't correct it because it is acceptable English. Now, yet and already and just as well are used quite commonly with the present perfect. Let's look at some differences with those words. I have already seen that film would be a British English sentence.
Yes, but Americans might well say, I already saw that movie. So instead of using a present perfect, there I used a past simple. That doesn't sound good to British ears, particularly because it has the word already in it.
Exactly.
It doesn't say, I think if you did, let's say, a Cambridge exam, which tends to have, a kind of British bias, in a speaking exam, the examiner wouldn't like to hear that, even though it's perfectly okay in American English.
And I would say the same thing about yet. If I said to you, did you take the B2 first exam yet? You might think, wait a minute, shouldn't it be have you taken the B2 first exam yet? Because of yet and already associated with the present perfect, it sounds a bit strange to our ears, although probably not to an American's ears.
Can you think of an example with the word just, Craig?
Well, I've just sent you an email.
Okay, to me, that sounds like the natural way to do it because it's clearly a recent thing, present perfect, and with the word just. But Americans might say, I just sent Reza an email. So not I've, but I sent with just in the middle. I just sent. Sounds unusual for British ears, but we're used to hearing it from Americans. But for us, particularly when you add these expressions like yet, already, and just, it seems even more important to put it in the present perfect. But not for Americans, not in American grammar.
And I know what you might be thinking. You might be thinking, wait a minute, didn't Craig and Reza just say the same sentence? No, you might not have heard that contraction. I said, I've just. So I've is I have just. Present perfect. I've just. It's very difficult to hear when native speakers contract that have. I've just sent Reza an email.
Craig, your mom just called.
That's unusual. She's been dead 6 years.
Yeah, we maybe need to change that example. Well, look at the positive side. She finally figured out how to use Skype after all those years.
Yeah, she's Skyping in the sky there. Oh, Mum, how you doing? Craig, your mum just called. So that's the US sentence, right?
Yeah.
I would probably say in UK, British English, Reza, your mum's just phoned. So obviously using phone and not call, that's more British English, to phone someone. And your mum's just phoned. So that S on mum is present perfect. Your mum has just called. And as Reza said, he would probably use in American English the past simple. Your mum just called.
And then remember, of course, that's going to affect a lot the question form, because the question form in English is not the same as the positive form. The word order changes and you might have to add an auxiliary. Can you think of an example, Craig?
Yeah, I could say, has Reza left yet? That's British English. Has Reza left yet?
So Craig used the present perfect, and Americans might say, did Craig leave yet? So with a past simple. So my auxiliary was did. Craig's was has.
And wet is different in British English and American English when we speak about the past. The second form, she wet the car windscreen before cleaning it. That's in the past. Wet, wet, wet. We don't change that word. It's irregular, that verb.
But in American English, and I'm going to try and do good pronunciation if I can. Let's see. She wetted the car windshield before cleaning it. Can you hear that my T's pronounced in a much different way in American English? Not wet, but wedded.
It almost sounds like a D. It's very dark, isn't it? Wedded.
She wetted the car. So Craig said she wet, and I'm saying she wetted.
And we wouldn't say wetted. We would just say wet as the past tense of wet.
You said earlier the parts of the verb wet, wet, wet. That was a group. Do you remember? There was a band called Wet, Wet, Wet.
Yeah.
If they had existed in America, they would have had to call themselves Wet, Wet, Wedded. It doesn't sound as good, does it?
Didn't they sing It's Raining Men? Was that Wet, Wet, Wet?
No. That was the Weather Girls.
That was a joke that didn't work. Next, we've got fit. Another verb that is slightly different. Fit, to fit. For example, the back of a car in English, in British English, is the boot of the car. That's where you put your suitcases and boxes. So you could say all of the boxes fit into the boot. Or you could say fitted with an ed ending in the past. All of the boxes fitted into the boot. Americans, Reza?
In American English, they don't have a form with ed. So their forms of the verb are just fit, fit, fit. So the past in American English would be all the boxes fit into the trunk. That's in the past form. It's a bit ambiguous, isn't it? Because it could be the present as well, couldn't it? But in the past, it's fit the same as the present fit in American English.
And notice the vocabulary changed. The boot, where you put your boxes and suitcases at the back of the car, in American English is the trunk. Trunk. Does it fit in the trunk? Moving on to dates. Now, speaking about dates is an area of confusion or can be confusing. British would say, my birthday is the 9th of September. What would the Americans say?
My birthday is September 9th.
Okay, so the 9th of September. Notice the article and the preposition there. The 9th of September, the 25th of May. And they're written differently too. In the UK, you'd write for the 25th of May, 25/5/2022. But the day and the month are reversed in American English. You would write 5/25/2022. So in American English, you write the month first and then the day. In British English, the reverse. The day first and then the month.
In other words, in British English, we do it the same as Spanish. It's the Americans who do it differently to the Spanish.
Or different.
Oh, different, right. And of course, you can figure it out always without any problem whatsoever, with the minimum of common sense, if it's beyond the 12th day of the month, because there aren't 13 months, are there? So if there's a 13 or higher number there, it's clearly not a month, is it? Because the months only go up to 12. So you can figure it out. The big problem is, for example, here's one for you. 9/11. Now, what's that? Is it the 9th of November? Or is it the 11th of September? Well, it depends if you're British or American. And I haven't picked that at random. It's an extremely well-known date. 9/11, 2001, is the date of the infamous terrorist attack on the Twin Towers in New York, which killed, sadly, many people. So because it happened in America, it's known as 9/11, which is the American way of saying the 11th of September. But if that had happened in London, I'm sure that it would be remembered as 11/9. But it didn't. It happened in America, so it's done the American way, 9/11. And I think even in Spanish, when you talk about that event, you tend to say 9/11. And you write it that way. It's become known as that. But it doesn't make sense if you think about it. If you're not American, it should be the other way around. But because it happened on American soil, we've learned it the American way. So 9 is the month, first of all, and then 11th, the date coming afterwards, the American way.
So as we've seen before, Americans speak different or differently. As we said before, let's move on to adjectives and adverbs. There's a tendency, and this is not a rule, it's just what I've been used to hearing, and I don't know if you agree, Reza. Americans tend to use the adjective sometimes as an adverb. I hear Americans say, you did good, instead of saying, you did well. If you ask a person from the US, how are you? You might hear, I'm good, instead of I'm well. Have you heard that?
Yes, and I've even heard some non-Americans starting to say that. The reply to, how are you? I'm good. I've heard non-Americans in recent times, not many, but a few beginning to say it. But I must admit, I slightly object. Call me old-fashioned.
You're old-fashioned.
But I slightly object to, you did good. For me, this is where I'm becoming the strict English teacher.
The purist.
The purist. Not the Puritan, that would be more American, but the purist. I'm not a New England patriot. Or even an Old England patriot.
Or even a patriot.
For me, you did good. In British English, you did good exists as well. But it's not the same as you did well. No. So I'm a football manager. After the match, I say to the guys, hey, well done, guys. You played well. You did well. Not you did good. No. You did well. For me, you did good means you did a good thing.
You did a good deed, a good action.
Same thing.
Exactly.
It's like, oh, you gave away all your money to that man in the street, even though you said you were going to invite me out for dinner and now you can't? Yep. Well, you know what? I don't care. You did good. You did good. It was a good thing, a good deed that you did. For me, in British English, I would say there's a difference. Would you agree?
Yes, absolutely, 100%. But as we mentioned, it's probably more common in American English, or very common to hear at least, things like you did good, or I feel good, or do it quick instead of do it quickly. And what's really interesting to me is think different, because that was a very famous Apple slogan to advertise Apple products a few years ago. Steve Jobs insisted the use of different and not differently. He wanted different to be thought of as a noun, in a similar way to think beauty or think victory, for example. And of course, it's very common to hear think big as a colloquialism.
Yeah, for me, think differently would not mean the same as think different. It definitely wouldn't. Think differently, for example, would be like this. I have a son who has autism. He thinks differently. That means he thinks in a way which is not the same as you and I. But that isn't what Steve Jobs wanted to make you understand. By think different, he was not saying that you should think in a way that's different to other people, but no, you should think about how to be different. That's what it means for me. It's not the same meaning.
Very, very clever slogan. And you do hear that a lot in American English, that adjective used as an adverb. I often hear people talking about software, for example. It works different to the other software. I hear that very, very often. Reza, what about the subjunctive?
No, the subjunctive is a word which, if you're a foreigner learning Spanish, can instantly make you cringe. To cringe is to go, no, don't like this, not looking forward to it, because it's a nightmare for us English speakers when it comes to learning Spanish to talk about the subjunctive, because it seems to be an awfully complicated thing which you Spanish speakers love. And in English, we don't have much of a clue about. But let me tell you, folks, the subjunctive does exist in English, though it isn't often used. And in fact, most English speakers don't even know when they're using it. They wouldn't know that they're using a subjunctive while they're actually using it. We don't really know much about it. Craig and I know about it because we're English teachers, but even then, we don't really talk about it very much. But people who are not interested in teaching English probably never heard of it. But here's the weird thing. Believe it or not, it's actually slightly more common in American English than in British English, but specifically formal American English. That's right. It's weird, but true. What about this? The sentence, we suggest she appeals to the Supreme Court. So we got the verb suggest, we suggest. And then after that, we got a verb in the present simple. She appeals. I appeal, you appeal, she appeals to the Supreme Court. Well, you're very likely to hear, particularly if it's a formal setting in American English, the following. We suggest she appeal to the Supreme Court. Oh, the S has disappeared from the word appeal. Not a big deal, but the only thing that means is actually you're using a subjunctive. If you're using a third person singular in the present, but you don't put the S, so he, she, it appeal, that's actually a subjunctive you're using. It's the only difference. All the other parts are the same. We appeal, you appeal, they appeal. There's no S, so nobody knows if it's an indicative or a subjunctive. It doesn't make a difference. It's only in that third person singular, if you want to use a subjunctive, you drop the S. And Americans do that. Particularly for formal English, they actually drop the S and they use a subjunctive. Can you think of another example, Craig?
Yes, I've got one here. The police officer demands that he hands over the weapon for forensic investigation. That would be the British English way, the indicative. To hand over means to give, to submit. So he hands over with that S. The American subjunctive, the police officer demand, or I'll try an accent, shall I? The police.
Yeah, let's go far south. Let's go down south. Yeah,
Let's go down
south.
Way down south to the police. So the police officer demands that he hand over the weapon. So that's without the S. He hand over the weapon for forensic investigation.
That actually made me think of a specific person, an authentic American. You made me think of Jimmy Carter. It really sounded like President Jimmy Carter.
Wasn't intentional. Now, another area we should look at, complex nouns. Complex nouns when you're combining two words together, but it is a noun. For example, people who box, boxers, and also young children, they use, in American English, a jump rope. A rope for jumping, a jump rope. In British English, we would say a skipping rope. Can you think of any more examples?
Yeah. In American English, I've heard the expression dive board. What would that be in British English?
That would be a diving board.
And another one, wait list.
That would be a waiting list. And you can probably notice a pattern here. The complex nouns in British English tend to have the ing, the gerund. So skipping rope, diving board, waiting list. I'll put you on a waiting list, whereas our American cousins would say wait list.
Another aspect which occasionally throws up differences is when it comes to prepositions. The most obvious one which comes to mind is to write to someone or simply write someone. So in British English, what might you say, Craig?
Reza wrote to me.
Okay. And so the American version is to take away the preposition to. Craig wrote me. So no to there.
And with the verb to speak, there are different prepositions you can use. You can speak to someone, you can speak with someone. I understand in British English, using with has more of a suggestion of it's a two-way conversation. You're speaking together. Whereas the preposition to, it's going only in one direction. The teacher spoke to the student only listened. That's my view on it. Although I think in UK English, to speak to someone is maybe used more, and in American English, they're more likely to say Reza spoke with Craig.
Another difference using the word to in British English, for example, Monday to Friday, so Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Monday to Friday. How would they say that in American English, Craig?
They would use the word through, Monday through Friday. And although the common spelling is THROUGH, you'll often see that word in American English written THRU, which makes so much more sense to me because that is how you say it, through, Monday through Friday. Our business is open Monday through Friday. Our podcast is open 365 days a year, so it's your turn now to practice your English. Do you tend to speak British English, American English, or maybe a blend, a mixture of the two? And which do you prefer? Do you have a preference? We would love to hear from you. Why don't you let us know? Reza, how can people send us a voice message and practice their English?
You can leave an audio message, and we don't care if you have, by the way, an Argentinian, Bolivian, Cuban, Spanish, Portuguese, Brazilian accent, and we don't care which form of Spanish you speak. You can leave a message for us. If you want to put on an American accent, go for it. If you want to use a British accent, or if you're feeling really confident, you want to try an Irish accent, go ahead and leave us your message at speakpipe.com/Inglespodcast.
If you want to reach us by email, emails go to me, Craig, at inglespodcast.com, or to Reza at Belfast, Reza, R-E-Z-A, at gmail.com.
This podcast is sponsored partly by mansioningles.com. Why not have a look at the link in the show notes, which is store.mansioningles.net. If you follow that link, you'll find a range of interesting products which could help you further practice and improve your English.
And we cannot say goodbye this week without thanking all of you who help us by supporting us on Patreon. And you too are welcome to join the Patreon program. You need a minimum of $1.50 per month, and then you get instant access to all transcriptions of the podcast, so you can read every word that you hear. For more information, go to Patreon, patreon.com/Ingles podcast. Reza, who has recently joined our Patreon program?
Our most recent sponsors are Ángel Albaladejo Perez, Tanawat Satanakul, or Carlos Esquerdo, and Luisa del Valle Arias, who has increased her support. Thanks very much, Luisa.
Next week, we're staying with grammar. We're going to look at the difference between singular and plural nouns. So join us for that and improve your grammar. Thank you for listening this week. It's been lovely to have your company. Until next time, it's goodbye from me.
And it's bye-bye from me.
The music in this podcast is by Pitts. The track is called See You Later.